In the shadowed corners of European religious history, nestled quietly between conventional Christianity and the esoteric spiritual movements of the 20th century, lies a little-known sect known as the Antoinists. Emerging in the industrial town of Gemep-sur-Meuse in Belgium around the turn of the 20th century, the Antoinist movement was founded by a charismatic figure named Louis-Joseph Antoine. This seemingly unassuming former Catholic, steelworker, and self-styled prophet transformed his personal revelations into a unique and secretive religious current that briefly flourished in Belgium and France. The Antoinists are often relegated to footnotes in books on religious history, yet their combination of Christian-inspired doctrine, secret healing rituals, and hierarchical priesthood dressed in austere black robes presents a fascinating case study in how alternative spirituality attempts to negotiate with tradition, authority, and mystery in the modern world. The origins of the Antoinist sect are deeply personal and rooted in the transformative experiences of Louis-Joseph Antoine himself. After a life filled with hardship, spiritual seeking, and encounters with spiritualism and theosophy, Antoine claimed to have received divine inspiration. In 1906, he began healing the sick not through medicine, but through the laying on of hands and spiritual force. As his reputation as a healer grew, so too did his followers, many of whom were disillusioned with both the rigid dogma of institutional religion and the cold rationalism of science. Antoine began preaching a message that melded Christian ethics with mystical spiritual healing, underpinned by the belief in reincarnation and karmic purification. The Antoinist doctrine rejected materialism, emphasizing moral purification and selflessness as a path to spiritual health. According to Antoine, illness was the consequence of moral or spiritual imbalance, and healing came through faith, humility, and the spiritual intercession of the Father, a title he eventually assumed for himself. What made the Antoinists particularly secretive and unusual among Christian-based sects was their creation of an entirely new set of scriptures and a uniformed priesthood. Antoine authored a new canon titled The Revelation, composed of dense spiritual writings that were claimed to be received directly from divine inspiration. This book, which is held in deep reverence by adherents, serves as the sole doctrinal authority, replacing the Bible in Antoinist liturgy. The text is intentionally cryptic, often written in a mystical, abstract tone that demands deep meditation to interpret. Within these pages, Antoine set out his vision of divine justice, human suffering, and spiritual healing, urging followers to relinquish judgment and ego in order to attain harmony with the cosmic force of good. His teachings instructed believers to forsake formal medicine in favor of spiritual remedies, relying on the healing work of Antoinist priests called devotees who underwent rigorous spiritual training and moral purification to assume their roles. The priesthood itself is another element that set the Antoinists apart from mainstream Christianity. Dressed in austere black robes that symbolized humility and detachment from worldly concerns, the priests conducted healing services within temple-like spaces, known as temples of the Father. These temples, sparse and modest in decoration, became sacred spaces where the sick and spiritually wounded came to receive invisible treatments, non-physical acts of spiritual cleansing and energy alignment administered by the priest through prayer and mental concentration. The rituals themselves were shrouded in secrecy. Devotees would rarely explain their methods, and the core of the ritual practice was not open to outsiders or the uninitiated. Healing sessions were quiet, solemn affairs, devoid of spectacle or ecstatic behavior, yet followers claimed profound experiences of spiritual transformation and recovery from ailments. The rituals were deeply symbolic, and only those who had passed through the ranks of the movement truly understood the meanings behind the gestures, words, and silences used during the services. The Antoinists did not proselytize in the conventional sense. Unlike evangelical movements that spread through mass media or missionary zeal, the Antoinists grew quietly, almost by osmosis, from one seeker to another, largely among the working-class populations of Belgium and northern France. Their appeal was in part due to their accessibility. Services were free, donations anonymous, and there was no expectation of tithing or conversion. Anyone could enter a temple and participate in a service, but full initiation into the priesthood required a strict moral and spiritual code. The movement attracted individuals disenchanted with both state-run institutions and traditional churches, offering them not just spiritual solace, but a coherent metaphysical explanation for the suffering they endured in their daily lives. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Antoinist movement was its complete rejection of hierarchy outside its own spiritual structure. The sect was fiercely independent from the Catholic Church, which it viewed as corrupted by dogma and power. It was also cautious of the state, wary of political entanglements and surveillance, which perhaps explains part of its secretive nature. The movement was recognized officially in Belgium in 1922 as a religious denomination, but this did not prompt it to shed its enigmatic ways. Even today, Antoinist temples do not bear overt symbols or signs that would identify them as places of worship. They blend quietly into residential streets, their facades often indistinguishable from other buildings, reflecting a philosophy that spiritual power should be veiled, not flaunted. This approach helped the Antoinists survive decades of skepticism, repression, and cultural marginalization. Despite its early momentum, the Antoinist movement began to decline in the mid-20th century. The rise of modern medicine, the decline of institutional religion in Western Europe, and the fading memory of Louis-Joseph Antoine's personal charisma all contributed to the shrinking of the sect's following. While it had once boasted over 60 temples across Belgium and France, today only a handful remain active. These are maintained by a dwindling but devout group of elderly adherents who still don the black robes, conduct the healing rituals, and revere the teachings of the Father. The sect has no website, no social media presence, and does not publish outreach materials, a deliberate choice rooted in its foundational principles of humility, inward devotion, and silent service. In an age of hypervisibility and religious branding, this quiet persistence is perhaps the most radical stance of all. There is something hauntingly beautiful about the story of the Antoinists. They represent a strand of European religious life that is vanishing, one marked not by confrontation or conversion, but by quiet devotion, esoteric knowledge, and the belief in the sacredness of healing. They are spiritual hermits living in plain sight, temples of contemplation hidden in the heart of European towns, slowly fading into the obscurity from which they came. And yet, for those who take the time to uncover their story, the Antoinists offer a compelling vision of what religion might look like when stripped of its power structures, focused solely on service, healing, and inner transformation. In their temples, the silence is not emptiness, but the hum of invisible labor, of hands lifted in prayer, of minds aligned to a higher purpose, of lives lived in the shadows of holiness. The Antoinists' retreat into silence is a poignant counterpoint to the loud, performative spirituality of many modern religious movements. It poses difficult questions about the role of secrecy, ritual, and inwardness in religious life. Are spiritual truths better revealed in mystery than explanation? Does the divine require advertisement or only devotion? In their refusal to grow, to modernize, to even explain themselves, the Antoinists embody a radical purity of intent. They do not need to be understood, only respected. Their story reminds us that not all religious revolutions shout from rooftops. Some whisper through veiled rituals in forgotten temples, healing the world one soul at a time. And so, the Antoinists remain, a flickering candle in the storm of secular modernity. their temples like time capsules of a world that once believed that faith alone could heal all wounds. As historians and spiritual seekers look back on this unique religious experiment, it becomes clear that the Antoinists were not just a healing cult or a Christian splinter group. They were a spiritual response to an industrial age of suffering, a balm for bodies and souls alienated by the machinery of modern life. Whether they vanish completely in the coming decades or somehow persist through their quiet rituals, their legacy endures as a testament to the power of hidden faith and the mystery of spiritual healing.